The Smiling Human podcast is made possible by listeners like you. If you would like to experience more of these shows into the future, then please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/thesmilinghuman. Hello, and welcome to The Smiling Human, where collectively we evolve through inquiry. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of The Smiling Human podcast. Today, I have the privilege once again of speaking with Tei Taiyari. Tei is a heart-led student of simplicity, motivated by movement and nurtured by nature. As a counseling psychologist, yoga teacher, death doula, writer, and wayfarer, he intends to embody and ensoul a life that is dynamic, integral, and meaningful, fostering peace and prosperity for himself and for those he serves. Influenced and inspired by diverse experiences in relationship, travel, study, and ritual, Tei companions others as they creatively reclaim the wisdom of their wild hearts while wayfaring at the edges of thresholds and transformation. Through this counseling practice, he offers individuals and couples a nourishing opportunity to navigate life's thresholds in a meaningful and creative way. It will be said that Tei is also a very dear brother of mine, and he and I speak today on depth psychology, deep ecology, and eco-psychology, and an intermingling of how our own personal presence and responsibility comes to bear on the positive and negative opportunities that come our way in relationship to our own personal development, as well as our roles as stewards for this planet. It's a deeply enjoyable and enriching conversation. I hope you enjoy. Wonderful. Well, we are back again. Tei, thank you so much for being a part of the Smiling Human podcast. It's great to have you back.
It's my pleasure, brother.
And I'll ask you the question I ask all guests at the head of the show. What's the last thing that made you smile?
Right. Probably my puppy, man. I adopted this puppy, rescued her here in Guatemala. And we've had her for about 5 months. She's almost 6 months old, I would say. And we just got her spayed, right? So I think they call it sterilized. And so she's been in like recovery mode the past couple of days, real low and down and slow and cute. But today she's starting to get energy again and is still in that kind of slow, melty state, but also like coming back to life. And certainly she made me smile many times today. Just being her cute, soulful self.
Fantastic. I'm considering collecting the answers from guests for these questions because most often it's a loved one, an animal, some sort of meaningful exchange with a friend or a stranger. And it really points me anyways, towards the well of value in life where we really find this joy and meaningful connection. So thank you for sharing that. And maybe one day I look forward to meeting her.
I hope so. And I just want to say, like, life is relational, life is relational. And so then life's about intimacy. The more intimate we can be in our relationships, the more we're going to smile, the more we're going to feel alive and vital. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Most of the answers are in that way.
Absolutely. And that's a great bit of foreshadowing for our upcoming conversation here. The guests heard a little bit about you from the intro, and maybe they know you from our previous episode, or maybe even the episode I did on your show, the Wild Heart Revival podcast. But I am aware that you've written something for this episode, a bit of an intro on the topic that we can sort of work from. So I'd love to give you the floor here and we can start with that.
Excellent. Yeah, it seemed appropriate for me to bring some voices into this conversation that aren't mine, because I want to honor and recognize that so much of how I've been able to craft my perception and my understanding of myself and the world has come through incredible teachers. So just wrote up a few minutes of just kind of introing what our conversation could be, touching on some points that I think are meaningful to me right now and you, and bringing in some quotes from some wonderful teachers. So that is what this is. So, we're living in a time of unraveling, a time when old maps are disintegrating and the way forward is a mystery. In such a moment, it matters how we orient ourselves, what we pay attention to, and how we choose to respond. The voices of those who have walked before us, those who have listened deeply to the world, can help us find our footing. And so we begin with relationship, as we just touched on a moment ago. Before we can find our way, we must remember that we do not exist alone. We never have and we never will. So our humanity is woven through our entanglement with the more than human world. And as David Abram says, we are human only in contact and conviviality with what is not human. Only in reciprocity with what is other do we begin to heal ourselves. But this is not an easy path, as I'm sure we all know in our own ways. We're stepping into massive uncertainty, into a time when structures that we've relied upon are crumbling, collapsing. And I think that we are asked to move without guarantees, to meet what haunts us, and to embrace the fertile darkness, the mysterious unknown. As Bayo Komalafe says, encircled by crumbling fences and by an encroaching wildness, without maps and without answers, we will have to improvise if the sun is to shine on us tomorrow. These are the days of realizing that our best answers and questions are always provisional. These are the days we must fall apart to become larger. These are the times of many voices, when those haunting have to be met, because the future is not fixed and the past is yet to come. And yet, despite the disorientation that we all feel on some level or another, there is purpose in our being here. This moment is not a mistake, it is intelligent. We are needed not as saviors, but as participants in the great weaving of life. Joanna Macy says it like this: you are alive at this moment in history exactly because you are needed. She says the web of life both cradles us and calls us to weave it further. So our task is not to dominate or control, but to slow down, soften, and listen, to recognize that we are surrounded by more intelligence and mystery and care than we have been taught to believe, and to let that knowing shape the way we move through the world. Stephen Buhner says, I am and always have been interested in the invisibles of life, those meanings and communications that touch us from the heart of earth and let us know that we are surrounded by more intelligence, mystery, and caring than our culture admits of, how to re-inhabit our interbeing with the world, how to sit in the council of all life as kin rather than dominators, and how to live sustainably on this earth that I love more than I know how to say. But to truly awaken to this world is to awaken into grief. Surely we cannot open ourselves to the depth of connection that's possible without also opening to the sorrow and the pain that lives there. For all that has been lost, for all that is unraveling now, and what will, the grief, rather than a wait to escape, becomes a necessary initiation into deeper layers of soul. Stephen Jenkinson says that having a conscious now is a grief-soaked proposition. Whatever spiritual awakening might have meant in past times and places, if you awaken in our time, you awaken with a sob. So embrace your grief, for there your soul will grow, says Carl Jung. Grief and love are sisters, woven together from the beginning. Francis Weller. So, this journey is not about escaping into transcendence or seeking easy resolutions. It is about coming down into the complexity, the contradictions, the mangled middle of it all. Here in the heart of the mess is where we truly belong. Coming down to earth is about being in the mangled middle. So David Abraham says that our animal body is continuously engaged with the sensuous terrain, just as it is continuously engaged with the sensuous others that comprise the more than human community of the biosphere. We cannot know a place or a creature or ourselves without engaging our senses, and so engaging our animal body and the spirit that enlivens it. We cannot know the wild with only our thinking mind. The more than human world does not just surround us, it haunts us, it calls us in a way that demands our attention, our respect, and our care, says Abram. So we need an ecological concept of citizenship rooted in the understanding that activities that erode soils, waste resources, pollute, destroy biological diversity, and degrade the beauty and integrity of landscapes and lives are forms of theft from the commonwealth, says David Orr. He also says that the ecological crisis, in short, is about what it means to be human. And if natural diversity is the wellspring of human intelligence, then the systematic destruction of nature inherent in contemporary technology and economics is a war against the very sources of heart and mind. The refusal to feel takes a heavy toll, says Joanna Macy. Not only is there an impoverishment of our emotional and sensory life, but this psychic numbing also impedes our capacity to process and respond to information. Entanglement is the milieu of monsters. And Biokomolafe describes monsters as living at the edges, where the known world frays and something wilder begins to stir. They show up in the cracks of our certainty, in the places our maps fail, not as threats to be conquered, but as messengers of rupture and possibility. So, I think it's a time of edge walking, and I think it's a time of taking up the call to go deeper into the heart. And again, Macy says that a heart that breaks open can contain the whole universe. So there's something about grief, there's something about the heart, there's something about a willingness to feel that calls us into more aliveness. And I'll end with Mary Oliver saying that there are things you can't reach, but you can reach out to them, and all day long. So I think that that's what we're doing. We're reaching into the dark with humility and care and sensitivity and great feeling and hopefulness. And we can do that all day long.
Thank you, brother. We can do that all day long, and we might also note that it's absolutely necessary to do so. One of the threads that ran through that beautiful piece that you've offered unto us is the balancing, as far as I can see it, between this sense of individuation, this solo body, I am this entity, so to say, or at the very least, I am embodied as an individual, and the absolute primacy of interdependence and the interwoven nature of all life. And that balancing point is, we could iterate it in many different ways. We could say it's the balancing point between mind and body. It's the balancing point between self and other. It's the balancing point between consumption and creation. It's the balancing point between one and two, really, at the most essential point. And so as we're walking this ground together in an attempt to, I don't want to say excavate, but perhaps commune with, come to know and discover some of these weaving vines between ecology, ecological citizenship, psychology, and this universality of human thought, or at least the thinking human, so to say. What arises for me is this very stark conflict that is hardly ever spoken to. And I'll introduce it to you here because it does weave with David Abram and, in some senses, the more poetic pieces from the other speakers that you brought in, which is to say that to perceive through our senses is a bifurcating act. and it's a bifurcating act that leads us towards oneness. And I'll unpack this here. What do I mean by this? When we are sensing anything through any of our senses, the fundamental function of perception is to distinguish. It is to parse apart and then identify and recognize. But it's only in relationship to the observer or memories of the past or other contents of the environment that a perception actually forms. It coalesces only in relationship. And relationship is two-ness, fundamentally. The one cannot relate to itself, right? This is where we get some of those ancient myths where God says, I'm bored. Let me make myself into a million pieces so that I can relate and come to know this. Well, okay, back to the senses. Every time we're perceiving, which is happening not only on the conscious level at every moment that we're awake, but also at the subconscious and even unconscious levels, we're operating on a system of thought, a system of perception that is geared towards separation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I mentioned before that perception is a bifurcating function that brings us towards union. That's the point that I think needs to be reintroduced, or at least looked at when we're coming to the ecology of it. What am I trying to say here? Well, our natural proclivity is to turn the world into pieces, because when we can see the pieces, we can work with the pieces. When mother is different from father, is different from brother, is different from cougar, is different from fish, great. We can place those in a tapestry of narrative and story that allows us to function meaningfully into the future. Great. But what we need to realize is that the main function of perception is to allow whatever realness that we are connecting with on the sensual level to cross the threshold of that duality. That when we're immersed, let me maybe put it in a simple term. When you walk out into a forest and you're miles, kilometers away from any city sound, and you sit, it's not you in the forest. After a few breaths, after a few moments, after the shedding of that city mind takes place, there's a recognition, and anyone who spent time in nature will understand this, that we merge naturally with that living environment. That is how we are tuned towards it. And without that recognition, without those kinds of experiences, then the kinds of myths and narratives that are birthed exclusively from that divisive function of perception dominate. And we operate in a world of other things, not a web of life, not a tapestry of kin, not an interconnected and interdependent ocean in which all waves are influencing one another, but this static, segregated, and manipulatable world onto which we project will, we project dominance, we project ownership. And really, I'll tie this together with one piece. That myth and narrative goes very powerfully with what you were saying about awakening with a sob. Because as soon as that is lifted, for those of us who have lived inside that world and existed as separate, as material, inside of this colonial myth of materialism and dominance, we see that what we have done is treated the realist part of ourselves, the realist part of life as we know it, as something other, something to be dominated, and something without inherent value that needs to be respected. And in my experience, that's the greatest grief. And facing that is facing the individual and the collective shadow. What have we done?
Yeah, exactly right, brother. Yeah. And I think a big part of that, because that story of separation is like a software program in a way, in that it's been like implanted, you know. It's because the matrix of our earthly biology and spirit has never been disconnected from the living matrix of Earth. We wouldn't be able to exist without it. So there's this like mental software programming. And so I think a part of that, like another part of the program or another one in tangent, is this sense or this misunderstanding that doesn't allow people to recognize that everything is alive. That there's some kind of, that the living earth is like a backdrop or a background, that there's some kind of staticness to it, that we get to like go up on stage and perform our drama, and the background will just like be there holding us. And in some ways it is there holding us, but it's not holding in a static way. It's alive, it's dynamic, it's squiggly, it's emergent and complex, and it's watching us. And it's responding to us. And it's altering its behavior in response to our own. It's just another way of saying we're in relationship with everything. So we're saying, but this sense, I don't know, you're talking about being out in nature. So then I imagine you had some sense at some point that was so strong, in one moment where you realize like, whoa, the land is alive and it's breathing me. And it's all intelligent. And it's so much more intelligent than me. Sure, I could come in here with a machine, a bulldozer, and fuck it up, right? But that's not intelligent, right? That's just clever. And actually it's stupid, right? Depending on the context. If I go into a pristine valley and start carving it up to my will to, build some kind of whatever, eco hotel or something, right? The land is so intelligent that it can just even take the brunt of that kind of lunacy and still regenerate and still work with it. So yeah, I think that's another part of it. It's like everything's alive and it's responding to everything that's happening in deeply intelligent ways. And it cares about us in some ways too, that really matters.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that intelligence is not an external quality, that is to say that it's the trees or the land or the rivers or the other animals that have this deep nigh on eternal cosmic intelligence. That's how I would describe it, is to say that the intelligence that's present in human life and the more than human world is an intrinsic expression of the wisdom of the entirety of creation. And I want to weave this in because that point is what actually bridges us between this sort of mental realm of psychology or personal development or spiritual improvement and this very, dirty, earthy, body-based, real world. And that is to say that when we are experiencing moments of marvel, experiencing moments of awe out in nature, that's because we are recognizing something about ourselves. And this is where I see the bridge particularly, is that we move out into nature. And in a recent conversation I had with Ian McKenzie, he put forward the notion, not an original one to him per se, but he was bringing it into the conversation, that the myths that structure culture, the myths that hold history and guide social evolution and psychological development are interwoven inseparably with the land. Wherever those people are, it's the land that begets story and weaves itself back into it. And so when we step out into this world, at present, in this Western ethos, we are mythless, which means the tether that we had at one point to the wisdom of the land, and therefore the mirror that would have shown us the truth about ourselves that would keep us away from this idiotic destruction, has been lost or forgotten. And it's that mythlessness that leaves us untethered to an aspect of our own innate psychology, our own innate beingness and embodiment that,
Mm-hmm.
insofar as I see it, really plays out in all of the realms of destruction and chaos that we're seeing, be it political turmoil, genocide, ecocide, tyranny, what have you. All of it is essentially the consequence of either ignorance or a willful blind eye to one's innately interwoven nature with the rest
Mm-hmm.
of earthly life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And this conversation couldn't be more important, in my opinion. I think it's just one of the most important conversations. Like, the, there's this Aboriginal proverb I came across today, and it's something like, "Look after the land, and the land will look after you. Destroy the land, and the land will destroy you." And um, there's the truth in that too, of what you're saying, how it connects to what you're saying, is that stories, like, if you think that humans made up stories, you're so wrong, right? That's that human centric trap. The idea that we're the pinnacle of evolution, that we're at the end of the golden chain of being, that we're God's favored children, and that we're here to save the cosmos. And it's like, I don't think that could be, that's so far from the case, in my opinion. And so it connects to this understanding that I have, that, and that you're speaking to, is that story and the myth, and how that eventually becomes the infrastructure, the scaffolding, the programs on which we that shapes our perception and our actions and behaviors and the way that we relate to ourselves in the living world. That these things, these stories, these energies, these flows, these forces came from the land and the intelligence of the land. And Indigenous people have always known that, because they lived with the land. And they, I think most Indigenous folks around the world would say something similar to the effect of, we learned everything from our kin, right? There is this common sense, and it's obvious when you look out into the world and feel it, that we are the younglings, we're the babies, and we're throwing a fucking tantrum because we can't get our egoic, self-centered own way, that we can't control the entire context. So when I mentioned humility at the beginning, humility has got to be one of the most important virtues at this time. Slowing down enough to remain humble enough to really see and feel, experience, and be moved by the truth of things. And that means tuning into the land, which is nearly impossible in some ways if you're always living in the city, if you're always of the civilized cityscapes, and if all your work and your relationships are embedded in the cityscapes. So it's a difficult time to reckon with that truth, that if we're going to, like, grow up and mature and reclaim life affirming myths and stories, so that we might have some future generations of humanity to carry on the beauty that humanity can be and is in many different ways, then we have to turn back to the land, and not in some, like, heroic way, like everyone needs to go be a homesteader. But at the very least, you have to step outside of humanity's hall of mirrors and go out into the wildness of the world to just see what's there for you. It changes everyone. If people slow down enough, right? If you go out for a hike and you're just, I got to get this 16K in today because then I conquered that mountain and I can check it off the list. Like, no, 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 that's not what I mean. Like, just go out and touch and be touched by the livingness and the mystery of the world, and watch how it changes you. Your behaviors change, your perception changes, and notice how it changes to be more in union with life, more oriented toward life affirming practices, behaviors, actions, relating.
There's something to be said about the shift from outcome orientation to process orientation when it comes to modes of living. And what I mean by that was encapsulated perfectly in the example you gave of the hike. If I'm out, at Yamnuska or one of the beautiful other mountains we have here in the Rockies, and the only thing I am thinking about is the outcome, I need to get to the summit and get back before 4 p.m. so I can come home and eat,
Mm.
then the entirety of that majestic mountain that laid before me, every footfall, every bird call or encounter with the chipmunk or, a pika or whatever else is out there,
Mm-hmm.
is lost. It's lost to my awareness, because what I have done in focusing entirely on an outcome is I have placed superiority into the future onto a premise that I have instilled with it some value. But
Mm-hmm.
when we're really getting down to the brass tacks of it, and I love how David Abram speaks about this, value is one of those things that we recognize and that flows from the real. Okay, well, what's the real? There's nothing more real than the living. We'll put it that way. There's nothing more real than life. And so when we are actually deeply in communion with nature, this is more of the process orientation. Okay, I'll get as far as I can get. Yeah, there's times constraints. We don't have to be so nitpicky to say, well, I'm just going to live on nature's clock. I get it. But granting permission for the space to commune with, to turn on the senses, and to open the body, which is your earth. That's your planet. That's your vehicle, right? Earthborn. Open up those windows of perception and sensuality and sensibility such that more of your awareness is filled with a kind of awareness and perception that otherwise transcends that city-like mentality, but
Mm-hmm.
is still human, still natural, still living, still very, very real. It's almost like we will find more of who we could be when we open ourselves to that more than human world.
Yes, I'm glad you said that last part, because, this sense of like, this is my body. If you spend enough time out in wild spaces, it dawns upon you that it isn't actually your body, that it's just an emanation of the processes of Earth, and it's going to die and degrade and decompose and be broken down into all these life-giving nutrients. And so it's like you're a steward of your body and its perceptual capacities and strengths and weaknesses for a brief amount of time. And that really matters, because if you start to see yourself as a process, as a verb, as something that has a lifespan and will change and transform no matter what you try to do about it, then that just automatically kind of humbles you to like, oh, okay, maybe I can slow down and see, well, what's influencing this amalgamation of flows and forces that makes me who I am. How can I listen and pay attention so that I can live in better relationship with what's influencing me, what's contacting me, what's communicating with me. And yeah, I'm just reminded of this quote. I think it's Sackage Henderson. He says, "To truly listen is to risk being changed forever." And I think that that's what happens when you start to inhabit a process orientation, a verbing orientation, is that you start to realize that if you're not really listening and deepening into your skillfulness and capacity to listen and be changed and to be moved and changed by what you take in, then you're not really living. Then you're fighting the current. You're trying to control something that you were never meant to or even able to control ever. And so this is something, like, just to mention, I do counsel work with people, and something that I tell almost all my clients at some point, or invite them to do, is like, just go out into a natural space, whatever's available, leave your phone at home, and just carve out some no time. I know it's difficult for some people, but just like, don't be attached to the clock. Just know that you have some hours or something, you have some time, and you can just go out and you can trust that you can just allow the land to move you. And I invite them to just go out into that space. And if something catches your eye, if you feel a pull, follow that. And then you'll end up at a place and you realize it's special for some reason. And then you can sit down and kind of pay attention to what's there for you. More often than not, there'll be a subtle or grand epiphany. And then something else will catch your eye or a feeling sense. And listen to that and follow. And if you just do that, even a few times a week in a natural space, you start to really inhabit that verbing process orientation, like, whoa, I'm alive and dynamic and in a dance with the land. And like that matters more than I could ever really comprehend. And it's connected to, one more thing, it's connected to my heart's capacity to generate meaning. You know, you're not just pulled to random places. Like when you feel a draw to a spot, there's very real reasons. And so it really matters paying attention to that, following it, and then reflecting on like why. And if an epiphany comes, like really honoring that. Whoa, that's a gift. It's a gift from the land that's yours and only yours.
Those epiphanies are what we might say a bubbling up from the unconscious. And when we willingly traverse landscapes, we are tending to the channels of communication, whether we know it or not, between our conscious and unconscious being. And on that note, we'll take a short break and come back with the second half of the show. I hope you're enjoying the show so far. I wanted to take a brief moment to talk about just how you can help this show grow into the future. Did you know that we have an Instagram, a YouTube, and a Patreon? Probably. But if you're listening on YouTube, like many of you are, I would invite you to subscribe, to like this video if you've enjoyed it, and to leave a comment. Let me know what you thought. Let me know if you have any questions or maybe guests that you want me to interview. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Music or any other podcast platform, then please take this moment to rate the show. All of these actions go a long way to helping the Smiling Human podcast reach more people and grow into the future. Thank you so much. Excellent. Well, we are back now with the second half of the show, which means we are into the section called the Question of the Week. This is where I invite our guests to bring forward an inquiry, something that's meaningful to them. Maybe they've thought on it. Maybe they think it's important for you to hear as the listener, or maybe they want my take. So, Tei, what have you got for us this week?
Yeah, this is for both of us to chew on and see what kind of nutrient is there. I'm wondering, as I was mentioning at the break, it might be vague or wide or something, but the general wondering is, how do we know when something is for us? And I can give an example to be kind of a bit more specific. There's a kitty. So I've adopted 4 dogs in the past few years, and I have 2 of them now. 2 of them were street dogs. One of them probably wouldn't have lived much longer if I didn't adopt her. So for whatever mysterious, magical reasons, that was for me. Okay. Now there's this kitty. Oh, and I adopted a kitty within the past few years too. Got her a home too. Now there's this kitty on the street outside our home, and she's young and she has she's not well. I think she's blind or like partially blind, and her back legs are wasted. So she can't really do kitty stuff. She can't really walk that well. And she's just there like abandoned, dude. And so me and my love, we noticed her and we've been bringing her food, and we even went and made her a little bed kind of in the garbage zone that she hangs out in, and we're taking her food and water. And I yesterday was feeling very emotional. I almost couldn't even interact with her because how emotional I was feeling. So my love was like doing things with her, and I was just thinking the whole time, why aren't we just taking her home? Why aren't we just taking her home? And it's like, well, because there's already multiple cats on the property. We have 4 dogs. I've already adopted 5 animals in the past few years. Like, there's limits, you know? But what is that limit? So that's kind of, and there's so many other things in my life personally that I could draw from on this, but just a general sense of like, how do we know when something is really for us? It's kind of a pretty strange inquiry, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. I think it's important. I think because one more thing, given what we were talking about before the break, right? Like things are unraveling, collapse. We've been born into collapse. It's happening. We're having to find our way through the dark. Like there's a lot of things that need to be tended to. And we can't tend to them all or even close to all of them. We can only tend to what's ours to tend to. So I think it's more important than ever, maybe, right? To be discerning with where to take our next step, where to put our effort, where to put our heart's capacity. So yeah.
My sense is that the question might feel vague because it's maybe several questions in a trench coat. And if we parse them apart, we might be able to touch in on where the question is coming from, as well as what would inform us to bring a meaningful answer to any or all of the questions. So, in some sense, what is for me or what is for us could be rephrased to say, what is mine? Which is interesting. We're speaking about verb processes versus noun processes. And when we say what is mine, we're operating primarily from a noun kind of point of view. So forgive us for that. But when I think about what is mine, the work of domain work comes up. So what is my domain? My domain is everything that I have a right to and a responsibility for. Okay. So that is mine. And it is my responsibility to tend to the things that are in my domain. It's a little bit circular to say that my domain is inside my domain, but you get the gist of it. And so that's one angle. Is this a direct responsibility of mine? A direct personal responsibility? And we could take a high view and say, well, maybe a bodhisattva view, that the suffering of the world is your responsibility to tend to decreasing. Okay, we could say that. Maybe that's one look. Or we could take a hyper-libertarian view and say only that which pertains to the wellness of your body and the thriving of your life is inside your domain, right? There's a spectrum there. I'm not going to tell you what is absolutely correct, but it likely, with the Buddhist metaphor, is somewhere along the middle path. With that being said, we can look at this situation with the cat and say, okay, I didn't breed its parents, so I'm not responsible directly for its life, right? But I do have within my volition the capacity to interact, to do something to alleviate the suffering of this animal, this living creature. And this is where we shift from just talking strictly about domains, what is mine that I ought not neglect if I wish to live an upright, authentic, and noble life, something like this, and what is within my capacity? Am I actually able to do something? So it's not directly my responsibility, and I'm not taking the responsibility from somebody else, undermining some sort of already pre-agreed structure, but I can do something. Okay, great. So we identify capacity. It's not within my domain, or maybe it is. Am I capable of doing something about it or not? If I am, okay. Now the question becomes more body-based in my estimation, in my equation. If we've determined that it's rightful for you to take the action and that you're able to take the action, then the question becomes, is this action in alignment with my highest virtue, my highest being? How the heck do you determine this? Well, I fall back on the work of Dr. David Hawkins and his work in Power versus Force. He talks about the intersection of consciousness and kinesiology. For anyone who has not read Power versus Force, that is a paradigm shifting work. Absolutely
Great.
fundamental. The resources, it is scientifically validated over thousands and thousands of studies. Extraordinary. I can't get into the details here. It's a very thick book. But in essence, our body will tell us if something is good for us or not so good for us. And we can do this through somatic awareness, or what he puts forward as a kinesiological testing method. So, okay, not to get too far out of the weeds with the kitty cat here. When you're there with the cat, you can look at yourself inside, turn that view inside and go, okay, it's not directly within my domain, but I have a desire to do something about it. I have the capacity to do something about it. Let me put two potentials forward. I leave the cat and I keep bringing it food by the trash can. How does my body feel? When I am in that truth, how do I feel? Are my shoulders up? Have I lost my posture? Have I lost rigidity? Have I lost vitality? Or do I feel solid? Do I feel strong? Am I going strong, in the terms of Dr. Hawkins, in response to this? The other one, I take this cat home. How does that feel in my body? Do I feel strong or weak? How am I responding? Because to bring it back to the whole eco-psychology, depth work, the intersection of the human individual with this greater tapestry of life, and the nexus that is communication that weaves all of this together, your body is in constant communication with this universal field of life. And so you are not just the driver or operator of a meat suit that goes, should I do this? No, this meat suit is smarter than most of you, period. So learning the language of the body insofar as how it communicates to you about what would serve a higher life affirming purpose or not is one of the key questions, or one of the things that needs to be revealed in order to answer your question. How do we know what's for us? How do you know well enough in your body when something is life affirming or not, is really what we're getting at. Does that make sense?
It does, man. Yeah. And I'm thinking about that quote I brought in by Joanna Macy. She said something like, the as much as or if we're able to have our heart broken, then we're able to hold the whole universe, something like that. And I'm just thinking, like, sometimes, and especially living in a place like where I'm living here, Lake Atilan, Guatemala, there are dogs and cats all over the place that are just heartbreaking, dude. The condition that they're in. I mean, you just can't believe it. And so part of it too, I think, is for me yesterday, like the fact that I even had difficulty like engaging with the kitty, but my love didn't. And she was pretty like, this is what we can do right now. So we're doing that. And I was resistant to even engaging because I felt so much emotion, And it's like, I think I was resisting having my heart broken again. That I let this cat enter me, and I felt so much, and it prompted me to want to take action and like save it. Like how sometimes I feel like I want to save the world, not for real, but like there's that compulsion to like make things better all of a sudden. It's like, no, you know, things are going to go terribly wrong often. Things are going to die. Things are going to, right? There's going to be pain. And it's the unwillingness to feel that probably makes me feel so crunchy about any which decision it is, right? So that's a realization I'm having about that right now. And notice in there, I didn't have an answer, but it's just like a deeper honesty of like, oh, there's more to feel there, and then reassess in the body. Because what you're talking about is like, I was actually blocking in some important ways. I was blocking the flow through my body, through my system, because of the fear.
The sorrows of the world, if we can engage with them joyfully, is that bodhisattvic perspective. And it's also to take a very wise, and I would say holistic's not even the right word, but the tree doesn't look differently upon the rain as it does the hail or the sun. And I think that that's an important recognition, that there's an equanimity present in all other life in some sense. Yes, we shy away from pain universally, fair enough. And there's a fear aspect, and I don't want to get eaten, yada, yada. But there's a wise equanimity in that space. And where we maybe miss the mark is that we have generated in our mentation a hierarchy of emotion. Those
Mm.
which are joy adjacent or pleasure adjacent, we will overemphasize or, lift up, pedestalize. And those that are sorrow and pain adjacent, we run from. And really, that's just an outcropping or a sort of version 2.0 of our natural instincts to move towards that which is life affirming and away from that which is going to kill us. Fair
Mhm.
enough. But when we're speaking directly to this piece, and allow me to weave in the recognition of our interconnectivity, the recognition that we learn more about our humanness by engaging with the living world.
Mm.
Well, let's do that here. What
Mhm.
lesson can we learn from the living world when it comes to decision making? And the word I would put forward in response to this is generativity.
Mm.
Generativity, generation and regeneration of life, of that which is life giving, life affirming, and nourishing. Great.
Mhm.
What decision for you, be it about this cat or one in your own life, listener, that you could make from a place of generativity?
Mm.
Am I, and that is really what it means to go strong, because life is strong. When we're filled with life, we are stronger.
Yeah.
And understanding that we have the opportunity to move through the world and relate, since we're talking about how all life is relational and communicative, to do so in a generative way, even if that means you can't take this cat home.
Mm.
But can I be with it while it's outside in a way that's generative for myself? Because I'm generating a greater willingness to feel the sorrow that comes by watching this little kitten suffer. That's
Mhm.
generative for the little kitten because it gets some food, it gets some water, it gets some touch and some shelter and a sense of safety, even temporarily, right? So to me, that's a guiding star in most things. Is this generative or degenerative?
Agreed. Yeah, and wrapped up in that, I would say is creativity, and I would say that that creativity has some kind of support from redundancy too, meaning for um, uh, a landscape or a population of creatures to be generative in the face of challenge, difficulty, obstacles. They need to be creative. That evolution is inherently innovative, right? And so they need to be creative in order to innovate on their now moment context. But also, the intelligence of landscapes, at least, there's redundancy, meaning that a healthy landscape, there's a diversity of creatures, and many of them are performing similar functions. And so, in this way, with the cat example, we're going to keep going with this for a moment, is I'm recognizing now, like, well, I could be more creative. Like, maybe this isn't my thing in the way that I was thinking, but maybe I can be a bridge, right? I mean, I know, for example, we just had our puppy Spade, right? I think I mentioned at the beginning, the people who run that clinic, they help creatures all the time. So now I can get more creative and outside of myself and go, oh, actually, maybe I can connect this cat with them and maybe that will help. And there's redundancy in that too, because there's not just my home space where the cat might be able to be cared for, but there's other spaces that perform similar functions. And I just need to be creative enough and courageous enough to feel. That's another thing too, right? Because to be creative, I think it means you're deeply rooted in your heart, the wildness of your heart. And courage means to be with heart. And so to be creative is inherently courageous to step outside of the ready-made solutions and boxes and the programs and orientations that keep us narrow-minded. So yeah, those are some of my thoughts on that. And I really appreciate, by the way, this process, like, for real, because it's changing how I'm going to approach this, and I'm really grateful for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, happy to be a part of it. To create is to live. And there's a book by Rollo May, who
Mm.
is a
Rolo.
psychoanalyst, called The Courage to Create, who speaks a
Mm.
lot about that. And I think that
Hmm.
although he doesn't speak directly to the ecology or the ecological angle that we have today, there's there's nothing that could be addressed with creativity that couldn't first be addressed by knowing what needs to be responded to. That is to say, that if we are going to wisely apply our creative capacity, our generative capacity, we have to at least have some sense of to what end we are applying it. And
Mm,
so, returning back to the very root question that you offered, how do I know if something is for me?
mm,
That's a blurry and opaque phrasing. Because it's also a blurry and opaque way of understanding it. And it's like,
mhm,
okay, well, when we started to do this work, and this applies to relationships with parents, inside of business, how we relate to our natural environment, even the seemingly inaccessible and insurmountable global issues like climate devastation, genocide, political turmoil, when we are too broad, too vague, too wide, then we overwhelm our brains
mhm,
immediately. And
mhm,
so, one of the most essential psychological tools for assisting anybody in achieving meaningful change, either in themselves or in the world, is to say, okay, what's the first thing that you're capable of doing in the direction of this ultimate aim? You
mm,
want to change the world? Okay. How do you want to change the world? Do you want to have more people fed? Do you want more people housed? Do you want less animals to be homeless and suffering and abused? Do you want to reduce xenophobia and racism systemically across the world? What are you going for? Great. All of those are noble ends. Pick one and then survey your environment. This is the communication piece, so as to identify the immediate present channels ready to receive your generative action.
that's
That's
right.
really, it's no different than when you're outside attempting to survive, when you're camping. If you're going to go hunting or fishing or foraging, you are responding to the environment and saying, okay, can I forage here? No. Okay, there's this is in the way. I can't do that. Okay, but maybe I could use that log and get over the river and do this. And you're not meant to generate the answers yourself. You're meant to generate this clarity in communion and response with the environment. And that is true not just for the cat example, but for life in general, I would say.
Yeah, yeah, yes. Immediacy and imminency. It's one of the kind of dark symptoms of our times and internet culture, that we're so often taken so far out from our immediate environment, and we think that it's real, and like in some ways it kind of is. Watching, we I'm sure I don't want to necessarily get into this, but I'm sure you saw that Gaza has been, the ceasefire is broken again, and Israel's moved in and it's carpet bombing, and right. So it's like, that's real, and like we need to care about that. Like I think it really matters to care about that and to feel that. And at the same rate, it's like it's so far over there, you know? And so I'm not saying we can't affect that, but there's something, and I think this is what you're saying in your own way. There's something so vitally important that if you are going to affect that in some way, you have to attend to your immediate environment. What is your context? And is there disharmony? Is there violence in any way? Like, that's the shit to tend to first. And then I think that creates the kind of powerful, waving, emanation that might then go out and affect things further out. And so I think it happens far too often where there's people who are so bent on achieving some kind of mission that they think is maybe for the greater good, and and yet their immediate relationships are kind of like left behind in the dust, and even like their own relationship to self, like not tending to their body, their heart, and their soul in a deep way. So I really do think that in the face of this technocratic kind of nightmarescape that we live in, that it's becoming more and more important to like put these down like more often, like really be honest about how it's shaping our perception and our actions. Like put it down more often, like what's here now, my body, what's it saying? My lover, my children, my dogs, my garden, my neighbors. You know, how many people have they follow people so closely on Instagram, right? They never met them. They don't know anything about these people other than their Instagram profile, but they don't know the name of their neighbor. Like that's mind bending and heart wrenching to me that that's a reality, you know? So yeah, immediacy and imminency, so essential.
Mm. And our capacity to respond to that which is immediate and imminent is dependent upon our willingness to be sensorially and sensually embodied, because those needs and channels in our environment are recognizable only when we are willing to be where we are.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
will say also to the listeners, when Tei said put these down, he was referring to the cell
Oh,
phones that we have all the
yeah.
time. Yes, we have audio only listeners as well. So um, this has been a deeply enriching conversation, brother, as always. And I thank you for your investment of time, energy, and undeniable care that you bring to these topics and to your work as a whole. For those who don't know, Tei is in a position of counsel, among other things, in his life, and his wisdom has touched my life for a number of years, both in a friend capacity and in many others. So I would love to invite listeners, if they're curious about coming into greater contact with you and your work, where can they find you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, my website, which will probably be in the show notes, coyotecouncil.earth. You can find my podcast there too, Wild Heart Revival. Oak's been a guest. He'll be a guest again at some point. We have really touching conversations on that project. And yeah, my website, you can find out about the individual, the couples, the group counsel that I offer, as well as the death and dying support for death and dying that I offer. And it's all online at this point, given my lifestyle. And, that works better than people might think. So I invite you to, reconsider if there's a hesitancy there. But I'm always open to just meaningful dialogues around things that feel important. I realized the other day someone asked me how I make a living, and I said, well, I just have meaningful conversations. And that really blew me away, like, wow, like I can sustain my life just by showing up and having like real, deep, meaningful conversations. That's such a blessing. And so I hold it with great sacredness and care and sensitivity. And yeah, and so being invited onto this show again was a real honor for me, brother. I appreciate it a lot. Appreciate your heart and your mind and your willingness to just continue the conversation in different ways. And I think like if I can send an invitation out that has nothing to do with my work or anything, just to people, like start having the conversations that feel most meaningful to you. Like have the courage to wade out into those waters of uncertainty. It might be uncomfortable, you might flounder a bit, but it's like you won't get better at it by just staying on the shore. You need to go out into those waters and feel them. And I think you'll be surprised at what comes through when you really just like, like ground into a moment with someone, look them in the eyes, and just like say something that really matters to you, and say it in a way that invites them to then respond and say something that matters to them. Um, I think there's a superficiality that has become very pervasive in the culture at large. Um, and I really want to be a part of whatever kind of um, force I can be a part of that like just begins to dismantle that shit, because I think that this kind of superficiality or even like an addiction to surfaces, which is another way of saying what you were talking about, Oak. Like we always want to cut things up into pieces. You're not getting to interiority through that, right? You're just making more surfaces. And so you're complicating things. and you're not touching into the complexity of things. And the complexity exists in the interiority and the way that interiorities touch one another. And so that's part of my orientation right now. Is just like, how can we inhabit the interior more deeply together, more honestly, more humbly, and just feel what's here and take action, be moved naturally, but in like this slow, organic, listening way. So yeah, thanks for allowing that today.
My sincere pleasure. And thank you for your beautiful parting statement. And thanks for everyone for listening. And that concludes this episode of the Smiling Human podcast. Thank you so much for listening. But before you go, I have 2 invitations for you. The first invitation is to receive a free gift. I've created a free insight journal. This is a 30-day self-reflection and introspection journal that you can download at no cost in the description below. Go have a look and join the journey. The second invitation I have for you is, if it feels within your means and possible for you, then please head over to patreon.com/thesmilinghuman. Becoming a patron will give you access to perks like behind-the-scenes footage and access to live Q&As with me monthly. You also get voting privileges to help pick new guests or to help guide other episode content. Truly, the support of listeners like you, paid or unpaid, goes a long way. So if you could like, share, subscribe, and give a rating on the podcast app, all of that goes a long way. Thank you to each and every one of you who's been on this journey with me. See you again soon.